Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Charles Schulz said, "There is no heavier burden than an unfulfilled potential." Well, on today's episode, we talk about what it takes to reach one's potential and excel at the highest levels, developing a champion mindset, the power of clarity, having the right goals, and more. My guest is a husband and father, an Olympian, author of multiple books, a chiropractor who was awarded the International Sports Chiropractor of the Year, a renowned glass artist, and a human performance coach whose list of clients includes the rock band U2, Tiger Woods, Richard Branson, Lance Armstrong, and many others. He's helped athletes win over 40 Olympic medals and cycling teams win 8 Tour de France's. Please welcome the man who builds champions on the field and in the boardroom, Dr. Jeff Spencer. Jeff, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. And I was listening to the introduction there. I actually did all that? Well, I guess I did. So thanks for the opportunity, Jay.
It is my pleasure. And I'm so excited to dive into this one, researching you and consuming your content and listening to interviews that you've given. It really has been not only inspiring, but it's helped to open my eyes to what truly is possible with the human spirit. And so with all that said, I would love it if you could take us back a bit in time. You know, I read in researching you that at 7 years old, you had set a goal to become an Olympic athlete at 7 years old. So what was happening in your life at that time that led to such a significant goal?
Well, like all kids, I was a bit addicted to the Marvel comics, and those are all about superheroes. And I felt that Olympians were really the superheroes of the human dimension, and they were doing superhuman achievements, and I was captivated by that. And I felt that it would be an unbelievable experience to be able to experience that on the human dimension. And I feel like the Olympics actually called me into pursuing it, and that's really how I got started. And then I didn't know how I was going to do it. And when I was 11, I showed some amazing ability on a bicycle ride. I went with a racing group of cyclists that invited me to go on a ride with them for 25 miles. And at the end of that, they were tired and I wasn't. So there was something, they were much older than me. So there was obviously something about the cycling connection that actually, again, chose me to be the vehicle by which I would become an Olympian. And I had just an amazing coach who taught me how to win. He brought me into his training group that involved Olympians, world champions, and he wanted me to be around the conversation. And he said that if you have it within you to become an Olympian and a world champion, then you will understand this conversation. And if you don't understand the conversation, I can't put anything into you that's not already there. So I had the natural self-start gene with that tutelage and that environment, along with a couple of other angels that came into my life at the right time. 10 years later, I actually was an Olympic cyclist. And so that's how at least that part of the journey started, and that's how that part of the journey wound itself down.
And it's an incredible story, and there's a lot more to it, a lot more layers to that tapestry. So I want to stay back in time a bit because I'm curious. I know that your parents had divorced, I believe, when you were 12. What was something that you recall that you learned from your mother, some lesson that stayed with you that just resonated through your soul that you carry with you today?
Well, I actually learned it from both my parents because they did not get in the way of me doing anything. but yet again, they never helped. So I never thought that, I didn't understand what parents were for. I thought we all had to figure our own life out for ourselves. And luckily, I had the self-starting gene that didn't get in the way of that. And so there was no suppressive influence or pontificating about what I should be, or any interference with my natural inclination to pursue, my own curiosity. So I will never forget the fact that I had that. And there's a kind of another side to this as well, is that when cycling showed up and the opportunity or the idea to become an Olympian showed up, I didn't gift that to myself. It was something that arose out of my experience. It was exposed to me as a possibility that I had a resonance with. So I clearly understood that, I didn't know my own potential, but my own potential could be revealed to me as untapped. And then it was up to me to do the action steps to cultivate it, to be able to get it where it could potentially take me to. And those are the incredible values that I'm eternally grateful to both of my parents, along with the angels that came along and helped me at strategic times in my life where I needed that fatherly guidance.
Interesting. And your father, I read, was a creative genius. Was he an artist?
Yes. Yeah.
He was an artist.
He was an illustrator artist that was unparalleled in his genius and fully recognized for that. The only problem was that he became an alcoholic and died homeless on the streets of New York City. And the last time I saw him when I was 13. So I learned another valuable lesson there, is that you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't know how to cultivate it, you can't manifest it. And it was a tragic way to learn the lesson, but nevertheless, I did see that self-sufficiency and being able to identify your hidden talents and to be able to embrace them and do what's necessary to cultivate them leads to an extraordinary life, which I have had as a result of that.
So you had used the word angels a moment ago.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I want to explore that a bit, because there have been a number of angels who have entered your life and who have impacted your life in a multitude of different ways. You mentioned the very first one, who became a coach. And you also mentioned something that I think is very interesting and profound, and that's that you had this within you. This wasn't something that was given to you, if you will. You found it. It found you, better yet. But it was a matter of cultivating something that was already within you. And it reminds me of mentors and mentorship, and how often we come across others who notice, they see potential in us that we often don't see for ourselves. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Well, that is absolutely correct. And one of the tenets of my life is that no one wins alone. It does take a team to do things for us that we can't do ourselves. And again, as I've said, we're all born with a certain level of innate talent, but we don't even know what that is. We have no idea. And it is unearthed, it is discovered, it is exposed through proximity to people. It's exposed by time we spend alone, petitioning for revelation and insight. It's also gifted to us through a natural curiosity. And when we follow those gravitational fields, there will be moments in time where we have very clear recognition of something that we know that we have an aptitude for. And when those things connect with us, there's this resonant recognition where the energy goes up. The experience goes from, I believe that this is possible, to I know that this is for me. That when we investigate and follow those things, then ultimately we start to build our capacity as it innately is, that allows us to be able to live the life of potential that we do have. And of course, without the unearthing of those certain things, then we live at a certain level of lesser potential that often leads to a life of despair. We all know we're capable of more, but if I'm capable of more, why am I not creating more? A lot of times that's the reason for that. And the angels are people that do see that within you. I had a couple of others that were absolutely essential in my life that brought something out of me that really contributed to the whole. For example, my second angel I met when I was 18 and he was 76, and I was an aspiring Olympian at that time. I was a student at the University of Southern California studying sports science, and he was a Renaissance man that was born in the late 1800s. He was a university-trained metallurgist. He was a World War I correspondent. He was also a Shakespearean actor, a playwright. He actually had a film that he won an Emmy for about his creative philosophy, and he also created a whole new type of art glass sculpture. And he chose me to be his apprentice, of all things. Why would he chose me, an athlete, to be his apprentice, creating his art masterpieces? But I had an inclination towards that, and he saw that, but I didn't even know that. And during our breaks, when we had work on the weekends and I would support him, he would play classical music to me. He would read the great poets. He would read the great literary works of history. And he said, I need to fill you up on this stuff. And so I had the capacity to absorb that. So with that, mixed with my artistic sense and along with my athletic abilities and prowess, it was starting to create a very unique cocktail within me about how I viewed life and how I was able to take the different assets that were part of what my life was and to combine those into a unique capacity to ultimately become an Olympian. I did show my art in the best galleries in New York City. Again, I was an extraordinarily good student, but I owe it all to my angels that saw something within me that awakened that which I had no idea of and helped me cultivate it.
So that's remarkable. And you mentioned that you took your artistic sense. So with those words, had you already been exploring the arts? Had you already been doing any type of sculpture, glasswork, painting, anything along those lines prior to this point?
Not really. Yeah, not really. I mean, my brother was a two-dimensional kind of genius taken after my father, but I wasn't particularly good at perspective and drawing. But then I discovered some clay, and clay is a tangible thing that you can manipulate in 3 dimension, which was a lot more organic for me, that worked well with my kind of kinesthetic sense. And that's essentially what glass is. It's like, honey on the end of a spoon that you soften to manipulate, using different temperatures and things like that. And it was a perfect fit for me, and the figure being the subject matter naturally, because I was an athlete, I was around movement my entire life. So it was actually a perfect fit that drew out my genetic pool from my father. It brought out my artistic side and my persistence in terms of the athletic requirements to excel. And it brought out a cognitive challenge that matched what my intellectual pursuits were. So again, all these things were a perfect fit. And then there was one added ingredient here where the cycling coach was more about the body. The person that I worked with that chose me to be the apprentice, he was really about the heart, but then the soul part of me came from a gentleman who had a very thick French accent when I first met him, and he had a dignity and a reconciliation about himself that I wanted to investigate, I wanted to have, because he was a guy that had just a peace and a sense of tranquility about him that I'd never seen. And he provided me with some additional support in terms of lodging and food that I didn't have because I was aspiring to be an Olympian. I was going to college at the time, and obviously my parents couldn't support me in any way, shape, or form. So there was some lean years, should we say, and he supported me in that. And I found out the secret to his dignity was he was a concentration World War II survivor, exposed to the most human cruelty imaginable, but yet he was so reconciled as a beautiful human being. He was the one that taught me humanity, that there's a certain dignity that you have to show up with. There's a certain level of appreciation. There's a certain amount of gratitude. There's a charitable side that has to be there. And there has to be an honoring of life's potential. You see the glass is always half full, and you always got enough to share with other people. There's always enough energy to do something on other people's behalf, so that when you combine, the physical side, the tactical side from the Olympic coach, 3-time Olympian, 5-time national champion, and then you kind of bring into it, my Renaissance man mentor, and you bring into it the humanitarian side of Alex Baum. It brought forth again another dimension to me that kind of explains kind of the unique way that I look at life. But I was fortunate because they turned on potentials within me that I had no idea that even existed.
It's truly incredible. Did you question any of this at the time? Like, why me, or how am I the one who is put in this particular place and time to meet these individuals?
I never thought that because, again, I didn't realize that parents were there to help you. I just thought that you were supposed to figure this all out for yourself. So when people showed up, it just seemed like a natural relationship that was meant to be to help us along the way. And so it was something that I was unaware of, but I see now that it's an essential part of life's prescription, that we need exposure to people, places, and things to be able to see what our full potential is. But in addition to that, we need to stand in receivership. Receivership is probably the most important word that anybody needs to have to create a life of fulfillment and meaning, because when we're in a state of receivership, meaning that we're open to possibility, and we petition for insights and wisdom and opportunities to show up in our consciousness, and we make a promise to look at everything without discarding anything. But sometimes we get so myopic with our own goals, we cone down to a cone of focus where we have no peripheral vision to be able to see better options, because we're taught to hyperfocus. We're taught to work harder. I mean, work harder and harder actually can burn yourself out, blow yourself up. Focus harder, you're going to miss certain things. So I think a lot of these ideas that we have about what it takes to manifest your highest potential life are really not accurate. They actually put us at higher risk. And one of the greatest challenges with this is that when you're not living a full potential life, you're living a partial potential, because you're trying and pushing and harding and trying to ram everything through, looking under every rock and using every second for moving forward without giving yourself a chance to pause and see better options, or to see blind sides starting to evolve that can be preventable problems. Then you really deleverage yourself a lot. And so, with that perspective on it, I was always in receivership, and I had a sense of how truth spoke to me. I knew how to recognize something when I had a gravity towards it to pursue it, and I was fearless about that, because I saw that intellectual decisions that are constantly made can put a lot of stress on an individual. Right one, wrong one, this, that, whatever. And I felt that life is a lot easier if you stand in receivership, to be aware and to listen and to observe. And when things are gifted, if the resonance is there, where you know what personal ambition and ambition for self's sake to showcase one is very different than being able to be called into service by providence, with a capital P, should I say. And that's always worked, very well for me. And that was something I discovered early. And it's certainly been, how I've made my choices about what I pursue and what I don't pursue. People say, well, how do you decide what goal to pursue? I say, I don't pursue goals or dreams. I answer the callings. And so when these things show up, I'm fearless about giving everything a look, and where the gravity is what I'll explore.
Wow. That is beautiful. So a couple of things I want to ask is we're talking about this receivership.
Mm-hmm.
First, the clients that you work with today, do they already have this sense of receivership, or is this something that can be taught, a skill almost?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, quite honestly, if we look at, let's say, like a natural human life versus a superhuman life, they're two different things. And, we do have kind of two different mentalities. We have a human mindset and we have a champion's mind. Those are not the same thing, and they're different. And if we look at human nature is all about being fear-driven, to make sure that we have enough so we're not caught with our pants down. It's about complaining and whining, blaming other people. Nothing's ever good enough. If I was only understood, my life would be better. I mean, and I'm really allergic to whining, quite honestly. And so I think that's more of a natural state for people. I think that what's unnatural, but is supernatural and possible, is to take action on doing what has to go right to cultivate and grow and maintain your skills, because nothing that's really good in life self-perpetuates. Everything will obviously drift back to a previous base humanness that is only a fraction of what a person's potential is. But if the things that move us forward and keep us where we are and expand us into the next iteration, those things all take time and effort, and it needs to be continuously applied. But you don't have to put as much into it to keep it as it did to initially get it. So you're not adding more volume and more intensity to it. You're just swapping it out for better iterations as they're unfolding. And that's the observation. And that's very hard to do, because most people believe that how I act is how I am. I'm only saying, well, how you act, maybe your survival self controlling the conversation in your own head, where the champion's mind that you have that can look at things in a slightly different way and engage things where your talents are built and your life is built on the things that you're naturally good at, and the pacing and the unfolding of your maturity as a manifester is done with a level of intention. Then it's easy, well, not easy, but it requires a vigilance to live a life of passion, purpose, productivity, and also prosperity. And I find that that's really what the human dilemma is. We have these two forces within us that are struggling and competing for control over our decision making.
Wow, incredible. You come across in much of what I've researched in a couple of different ways. First, very articulate and almost philosophical, and also in a very calm and tranquil way. And you said when you were speaking about these angels that the third one that you mentioned taught you about peace and tranquility and humanity. Prior to meeting that individual, did you have a similar demeanor? Did you have a calm and peaceful way about yourself?
That was an evolutionary process over a lifetime, actually, because I feel like I was, born a gladiator. Because an Olympian is not called to average. To be an Olympian is its own journey, but it's a different level of evolution. What I mean by that is that, if you're born of the constitution of the Olympian, which I was, I didn't give it to myself. I mean, it was there. It's challenging, because to excel at that level, to be able to push through the barriers to get to the elusive 1 or 2%, most people can't do it, because it's so intense, where you have to put yourself into a situation that would be perceived as extraordinarily high risk. But to be able to extract the 1 or 2% that really matters, you have to be able to step into that progressively, adapting to and acquiring the skill to go into the unknown. Because, at the higher levels, 1% could be 20%, in an average situation. And so that's what I was created for. I know my DNA that was calibrated towards that. It wasn't calibrated towards silver or bronze. It isn't. It's just the way it is. And so with that side of it, and obviously the challenges that I faced with being a welfare kid from the age of 12 on, there were some moments of severe challenge and stress and strain, with the mother and the brother, and how are we going to do all this, and where are we going to get the food and do all that sort of stuff. It's like, it was really challenging, that put me in a place, the responsibility of which is way beyond my years and my capacity. And that was not a comfortable place to be because of the stress that it put on me. I accepted it and did it, willingly. But the missing piece is that I did need to understand more, not from the gladiator's perspective, because the gladiator's perspective is that when you go into the Colosseum, there's only one room for one guy to walk away. And it's not going to be the other guy. You know, that's not what it's about. And it's about, can we learn the skill, and can we put ourselves in a place to test our ultimate boundaries and our ultimate limits. And I saw very clearly that, you know, the combat side of athletics is one thing, but the dignity of humanity was another, that also has something to do with what our lifespan development is. I think that at a certain point, to discover the idea of tranquility, of being too early, is maybe not a good thing, because it hasn't taught you what the extreme limits of what are possible for you, the individual, that when tempered later in a natural way, you haven't eliminated or extracted yourself out of, deprived yourself of a very important part of the evolutionary process. You can learn things early, but that doesn't mean that you can be it constitutionally. It means that you've learned something, and so you're acting through what you've learned, but it's not a natural inclination. And I think that, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s are always something different in each decade that we can't believe is going to be true about how we think, but yet when we get there, there is this ongoing evolutionary side of it. So the fact that, angel number 3 showed up, when I was 20, was a perfect time for me, because to get the extra dimension, to be an Olympian, you needed to have a certain level of tranquility of being, because if all you are is a combat warrior, the combat warrior is not going to be enough. It's not. You have to have a soul. You have to have an humanity. You have to have respect for yourself. You have to have respect for each other. You've got to be willing to give it all you've got to showcase what is possible within the human dimension. And, if you make it all about you and all about your own dominance, you can't get to that rarefied air if that's your motivation, because it just isn't it. There has to be something that transcends that at a much higher level. And he brought that to me with his kindness.
Well, what you're describing sounds to me like becoming the full human. So in all aspects, so not just narrowing our focus in one particular area of humanity, competition, let's say, but becoming very well-rounded.
Yeah, because that actually makes you better, quite honestly. It's hard to believe that. People think, well, if you spend all your time doing one thing, it's going to make you great at that one thing. And if you take time doing something else, you're taking away what you should be good at or great at. That's absolutely not true at all. Like, I helped an athlete who was a cyclist, wanted to become an Olympian. And it came down to him and 2 other guys, and whoever won this particular race is going to become the Olympian. And I said to him, look, there's nothing more you can do training-wise to get any better without risking overtraining or injury. You just can't do that. We have to look in another area to find and extract that 1 or 2%. I said, you told me that between the ages of 0 and 10, you played the violin. You haven't played it since. I suggest you get your violin out and you play your violin, 15 minutes a day. What are you talking about? How would that help me as a cyclist? I said, because when you play the violin, it teaches you pacing. It teaches you flow. This is part of your developmental history. You just don't do something for 10 years and it automatically goes away. And if we reacquaint you with this fundamental, primal essence of yourself, about flow, about rhythm, about pacing, about harmony, a system that makes the exponential possible, where you perform greater than the sum of the parts, this is the way you're going to do it. And he thought he was crazy. But he did what I said, and he became an Olympian. So really, the mythology that surrounds what it takes to be a full potential player is absolutely unbelievable to me. Work harder, keep your nose to the grindstone, sleep less, do more, don't lose concentration. I mean, all this stuff sounds really good, but it's not enough to be able to fill in the essential gaps in the full potential puzzle that are necessary to emerge, so that your unique characteristic, knowing that there's only one of you in all the creation. There's no other Jay, there's no other Jeff. We all have something unique and different that nobody else has ever had in the 350 billion people that have been on this planet since the first footprint. And if we know how to access that, and we don't try to row the boat upstream, but we remain in receivership to be given guidance when to turn right and when to turn left, then we actually can manifest our full potential, but live a life of tranquility of being like simultaneously. That's the way that I've experienced, and that's what I see, and that's what I do with the clients that I work with.
I love this conversation. For all of you that are watching and listening right now, I'm sitting here taking notes as I'm asking questions and listening intently to what Jeff is saying. I certainly hope you're doing the same, that you're taking notes and that you're going to go back and re-listen to this, because there's so much information that's being shared with you that's value add for you personally and professionally. So do make sure that you're listening intently. So I had read that while you were at USC that you were riding your bike 100 miles round trip every day. Is that true?
Yeah. So what I did.
And this was part of your training regimen?
It's part of it, yeah. So what I did is that, on my handlebars of the bike, I create a little platform, and then I would outline all my material on 3x5 index cards. And at that time, I had good eyesight. And so I would study all of the notes when I would ride the 100 miles. I'd ride 35 miles in a loop in the morning. Then I'd ride, the distance to and from school, which is 100 miles. And then I do extra training at the velodrome to develop my speed. I was an Olympic sprint cyclist, but I did work on the road as part of my training, and that's how I did it. Again, I was just self-sufficient since moment zero, and I always figured a strategy out to be able to do the juggling act with all the parts taken as a totality, that when they assembled, created the system that when they were harmonized allowed me to play at a potential much greater than the sum of the parts. And that was not something that was done intentionally. It was just a natural rhythm that worked well for me. And I found that I could create, my art, I could do my studies, I could train to be the Olympians. And I never felt like I was two-timing either of them, or I was bored and needed something to pacify my ADHD brain. I never felt like that. I felt like I was honoring everything that was put in front of me to investigate, and it seemed to be working really well for me. I had no conflict. I had enough energy to do everything simultaneously. It was a real opportunity to experience another way at looking at life that was extraordinarily contrarian to the way that most people looked at it, and I got a lot of crap for it too. It's like exploring these types of things. I mean, every one of my friends turned my back on me. Who do you think you are, trying to be an Olympian? Nobody's ever done that from our neighborhood. I see you're too good for us now to spend time with us. The usual detractors that try to get in the way of any inclination towards an aspiring, life of, potential and capacity. That's part of what that experience is all about.
Did you experience any self-doubt whatsoever?
No. I
so
never
complete
did.
belief
No.
in yourself and your training, and knowing that if you follow your plan, if you do the work and you map out what it's going to take, that you can accomplish this.
Yeah. I mean, that is true, but it's like I never felt like the grand prize was the destination. To me, the grand prize was to have the respect and the reverence and the appreciation and the gratitude to be able to hold sacred the opportunity that was presented. To me, I felt that it's an honor ritual when something is presented like that, that you accept it with honor and you do whatever it takes to hold it sacred. And that's why I did that. So I never really thought about the outcome, quite honestly, because I always felt that whatever the outcome is going to be whatever it is, and I can only control the process. But the most important thing for me is that when I walk off the field, I have to be able to say to myself, I answered the call. I didn't want to say, hey, I got everything that I wanted for me, or I turned my back on something because I was too afraid to do it. I never even thought like that. It's just like, okay, this thing is gifted to you. And here's the other side of this, Jay, is that I always felt that it takes so much less effort to live life through being in receivership of callings and answering the callings, I found that there's always enough energy to respond to that. And where the energy consumption is intense and immense is when you're pursuing things and it's not happening fast enough, and we think we're going to get left behind, so we try harder to catch up, and everybody else's life is great and mine's not. I just need to work harder to get there, and nobody's going to tell me I can't do it. I'm going to show them that they're wrong. Now, I don't think those are reasons to do anything, quite honestly, because then you're playing everybody else's game.
That's the comparison trap.
I never thought about that. It's like it just didn't occur to me, and whatever the outcome was, it's okay, because I could walk off the field saying, you know what, I answered the call. I'm not reckless. I'm not afraid of responsibility. I mean, obviously, 10 years of my life from the age of 11 to 21 was devoted to one thing, finding and seeking my full potential and becoming an Olympian, to honor the opportunity. I didn't create it myself. I mean, that was through the help of other people, but just sort of saying here, you can either ride a certain wave of energy that's boundless and endless, or you can live it in a way that's extraordinarily energy consumptive by wanting it your way all the time, pushing to try to get ahead faster, trying to compress timelines. All that just creates endless frustration that, in my opinion, dramatically etches a person's health. And eventually they can't outrun burnout, amateurish, unforced mental errors, so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is so interesting. So at age 21, you're now an Olympian, and
Correct.
You were at the 1972 Olympic Games in Munich.
Right.
And first of all, at this stage, how did you identify yourself? Was there any particular way that did you identify yourself as an Olympian? What was that experience like for you from an identity perspective?
Well, quite honestly, I never thought about it. It's, like anything that I've ever done, I've held that as part of my history that explains some reasons for taking action on certain things that have impacts in differing ways. But, I never pursued anything because I was bored. I never put anything down because I was afraid of success. There's just kind of a natural rhythm of how things show up, and then things wind down. Something comes and inserts it as next. And so I feel like I can be part of any community and feel very comfortable there, but I don't feel like I'm tied to the community for identity's sake, and it doesn't really define me. I've never really felt like that. And I feel very comfortable in that because it's allowed me to be intergenerational. It's allowed me to go to places without any intimidation or awkwardness. It's just that's just never been part of any consideration for me.
I love that. So how did the attack on the Olympic Village by the Palestinian terrorist group Black September affect you during those Olympic Games?
Well, in the morning, I went outside and I noticed that there was a little crowd assembling, maybe, 50 yards from me. So I went over there and there was a guy who had his finger pointing up. So I followed my finger up his arm, my eyes up his arm, and I went up to the balcony. Here, this guy is with a ski mask on. I was right there. I did not know that there were 2 Olympic athletes that lay dead that were murdered at 4:30 that morning. I did not know that. But then as the helicopter started arriving, and from the helicopters arose athletes in sweatsuits with machine guns, sort of an odd pairing, but obviously they were military and sweatsuits, landing on top of the buildings and stuff like that. It's like, this is a serious situation. And being an American, we're not used to that. It felt like, oh, this is just sort of some movie scene that I stumbled onto. This is not real. Why don't we all just go home? It's like, no, this is the real thing, So it was very shocking in its reality when you feel the vibration of the tanks moving into the underground parking structure, reverberating. Helicopters. It's a bit disturbing because for me as an Olympian, the only reason you're there is to put in your best effort to showcase one of the best sides of humanity possible. And yet you're the pawn that's being held, that's dispendable for someone else's, political agenda. I think about like when, the terrorists demanded that the other 9 athletes get put on a helicopter at the Munich airport. And one of the terrorists got nervous, dropped a hand grenade on the floor, blew the helicopter up, and along with it, 9 athletes. The parents will never be able to walk that kid down the aisle. They'll never be able to hear the heartbeat. Done. I mean, that is freaking pathetic. And to me, I knew at that moment that the world had changed permanently and not so good a way. But there was a silver lining to this, is that in the Olympic Village, there was a theater. And in the theater, it was only for Olympic athletes. So I went into the theater. All of us were freaking dazed. And so I went into the theater. And in the theater, it was packed. And all the athletes had their sweatsuits on. Still got mine. It's right over here on the wall. And it was so amazing because the entire community of people that were there viewing were laughing together simultaneously with the same sort of guttural laugh and camaraderie. I felt for the very first time what it felt like to have one people harmonize into a single unified state of being. And the movie was Charlie Chaplin's masterpiece, Modern Times, that had no sound at all. And so the message of the movie itself was enough to communicate in a way that every one of us understood what it meant. And to come together like that was one of the most euphoric experiences that I've ever had, that does demonstrate what human capacity does have under certain sets of circumstances. So it was this contrast of the worst of humanity for all the wrong reasons against something that could be normal under specific sets of circumstances. And to me, that was a bit of I still think about this today when I think about it, and the impact that had, and the impact of me being an Olympian as well. It's something I'll never forget for a variety of different reasons, obviously.
Absolutely. So how did your experience as an Olympian influence your approach to the way that you work with your clients?
Well, that's only part of it, because one thing is that, the idea of untapped potential, that's a universal phenomenon. It doesn't matter. It's not subject to any denominational occupation. There may be technical differences, but the experience is relatively the same, whether it's personal, professional life, or whether it's, different vocations or careers. But I felt that, there are some 3 parts that are necessary here. Is that, as I said earlier, my job as an Olympian was to learn to perform and continue to perform my full potential. That was my entire job. My entire life, every second of my day was about one thing. It's about full potential play. And that's something very few people have ever experienced. And I have. I've experienced it personally at a very deep and intense level. I've helped other people experience it, so I know this inside and out. But that's only part of the equation. Then there's the ability to push and the physicality of it. If we're going to live a life of distinction and leave a memorable legacy, we have to know and we have to have the physical capacity to push when we got to push, and we have to be able to recover when we need to recover. But if you can't push and you don't have the drive, then you're probably not going to have the life that you think that, or the life that you could potentially have if you had that asset. So that's where my master's degree in sports science came into it, because I not only knew what to do, but I understood the mechanics and the academics of it, how to create it and how to keep it, but also what play at the ultimate level is, because people think the higher you go, the easier it gets, because the more notoriety you have. It's actually inverse to that, because the more notoriety you have, your the complexity of your life becomes exponentially more difficult with all of the things that go along with that. It's quite the contrarian of what most people think it is. So without knowing that and knowing how to negotiate that minefield, then you're never going to get to the top and stay there. So there has to be a Sherpa that can guide a person through that minefield to make that happen. And because of my familiarity with that, I can do that. And because of my understanding of the physical requirements of this too, we can determine what the push should be and when we need to pull back, et cetera, how we need to build our capacity to be able to create the best outcome of the potentials that we have. And then it was interesting because I helped all these athletes win all these gold medals, were 40 gold medals. And then business people came to me and wanted to become their own champions. So whether it's locker room, boardroom, doesn't matter to me. It's kind of the same thing. It's just that the technical sides are slightly different. And so the athletes came to me and said, well, I want to make sure that I don't limit my career through injury or coming back poorly from injury. And the people in business came to me in their late 30s and early 40s and said, look, I don't want to die like my same age counterparts that are dying of heart attacks and strokes in their late 30s and early 40s. How do I not do that? And so that's when I decided to go back to school, and I went back to chiropractic college to get my primary licensure in acute trauma and in wellness care, which I have some advanced qualifications for that. And so what that did, that gave me the capacity to make sure that my clients stay in the game over the long term, to have the capacity to have their best possible legacy created without a premature termination due to either a health event or a catastrophic relationship failure or financial ruin. I knew how to avoid all of those problems. And the advantage of that is that people saw, well, in Jeff has seen everything, which I have, and he's capable of looking at the totality of me and knowing how much of what needs to be there for me to peak perform. Because, most people have maybe 10 different experts that are talking to them that don't talk to each other. And each of the experts is telling them the maximum to do from their perspective. It's undoable because the volume is just too great. So people, that play a big game, they don't want to talk to 10 people. They want somebody that can understand them and know how to assemble all the parts for their personalized pie that can work together to create potential outcomes, which I can do. And I'm well-versed in business. I've been a serial solopreneur myself, and I know the performance side that we need and the health side. So I kind of became this one-shop Jiffy Lube shopping center for he can kind of assemble all this stuff. We can just do, a Jiffy Lube, tune-up here and we'll be good. And so that's how I got to work with some of the household names because of that particular skill. So that's how all this emerged and still remains what it is today. But there's one other part that's my most important crowning achievement, and that's the adoption of our daughter.
Speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, thanks.
Speak to your daughter.
She's the best. So I was at the height of my game when I was 58. That was 14 years ago. And my wife and I were called to adopt, and so we investigated that. We went through everything that was necessary to formalize it. We pursued an international adoption in Colombia, and we were matched with a child there. And so we went there and we took a legal possession for 6 weeks, a trial run. And at the end of 6 weeks, then everybody votes. You go home empty-handed, you go home as a family. So we all voted yes, and we brought our daughter home. She was 10 at the time. And I pulled my wife aside when we got back to California. And I said, this is a formidable foe here. She doesn't speak English, and we don't speak any Spanish. We don't have any language here. And she doesn't have any school. It's like, you don't need school in rural Colombia, for what? And she has extreme PTSD and ADHD from getting beaten up and, severely traumatized on every level since the age of 4. She has a parasitic-ridden body. She's malnourished. She has virtually no trust in humanity because everybody's betrayed her. This is not an average situation. And I said, because of that, I need to reduce my professional availability by 90% starting tomorrow. And along with that goes 90% of our income. And that was okay because, our job was to raise the potential, not just to save a life. And I know what it takes because that's what my whole history has been. It's about being a gold medal dad, but also, raising a gold medal kid. And so that was something that we undertook, the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life for a variety of different reasons. And also by far the most rewarding of anything that I have ever done. My wife cried every day for 9 years and 10 months. It was so difficult. And at the time I was working with, a handful of elite clients, but I was not promoting myself because I was unwilling to give up 1 millimeter of forward progress that we had worked really hard for my daughter. And so I didn't want to be the advisor that didn't show up for clients. So I went dark for 10 years, which is okay. People say, well, what about your career? Well, what about it? It's like I showed up for duty. It's like, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. I just sort of looked at it like, if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because that's not why I did this. I didn't barter with God. Hey, if I do this, you give me that. You don't do that. You show up and you do what's got to get done, and you trust the process, which I did. And you always got enough time to do anything on behalf of others. And I can also say that you can love anybody, man. You just decide you're going to do it, and it happens.
I love that. So where is she today? And all that you and your wife poured into your daughter, speak to how that changed her, and what does life look like for her today? What are her goals and ambitions?
It's a great question. Well, first and foremost, she was like raising Tarzan's daughter, jungle kid that wanted to do what she wanted to do, almost like a feral cat, animals that grow up in alleys and trash cans, they're of a different breed. They look at life completely different. And that's what her training was all about, raised as a cheat, a liar, and a thief. And whatever you got to do to get your own food, then you do what you got to do to get it. It's like really difficult. And so when we adopted her, nightmares from the physical abuse, very untrusting. I feel like she made our life incredibly as miserable as she could, but she didn't do that to be malicious. I think she did that to test whether or not we were worthy of her trust. And like, I'm going to make your life miserable. And if you still like me after I make your life miserable, then I can trust you. I really do feel like that was part of her psychology. And she wasn't going to crack me. I never raised my voice. I never said an unkind word. I never gave her that look. It never happened. And one day she changed. So you never discount the possibility of a miracle. And she graduated, well, let's put it this way. She was on the dean's list in high school, but we know how she got there. She cheated. And she knew it, and I knew it. She's a ringleader. What do you expect? And so we sort of had this little wink, wink. Hey, we know how this really happened, right? And so then when she went to community college, it was on the honor roll, and then she transferred to a four-year college where she was a soccer scholarship. I knew that she was back to be on par with her same age counterparts, dealing with the normal stuff that we've got to deal with, and no more nightmares. Slept like a baby, just a beautiful kid. I guess one other thing I'd like to add here, I told her three things too when we were raising her. I said, look, you're always going to have enough to eat, because she didn't have enough to eat. She told me that she used to take gum off the bottom of toilet seats and put it in her mouth and chew it to stave off hunger pains. For real. Wow. That's how the parents couldn't even get her a cookie for her birthday. And so I assured her, you're always going to have enough to eat. And I also said, I'm never going to let you down. Everything I said I was going to do, I've done. Because one thing I didn't do would have broken her trust in everything. And I also said that, look, if anybody deserves a break, it's you. But you got to earn your place on the team. You got to do what we all do. You have to scrub the floors. You got to do your time, And I said that with the most emphatic amount of love that I could give anybody. She's a great kid. She's the mother of a 2-year-old right now, just a beautiful little kid.
Ah,
She
wonderful.
reacquainted with her family a couple of months ago. She hadn't seen her family in 19 years, since she was 5. So that was a really an emotional reunion. They still live in a shack with a dirt floor. I mean, the depravity is unbelievable. And, to have the gift and the privilege of being the steward of a potential of a human, we should never discount the possibility of a miracle. And the other thing I want to say here, if I can, Jay, maybe the most important thing I've said this whole time is that, when we adopted her, she used to jump up at me and wrap her legs around me and bury her head in my chest. She'd never been loved, And I think in today's world, it can be discouraging at times. And the thing that I would want to say is that, my daughter hung on my every word. And I just want to say that if we don't, whatever we say and whatever we do, please don't discount the impact of how we show up. Because had people showed up differently for my daughter, she wouldn't have the challenges that she's had to face in her lifetime, because they would not have happened. And, we have that opportunity every moment. I think that that's the most important thing we could always think of. How am I going to show up today on behalf of other people? Am I going to give it all I've got to honor this privilege, and whatever they do with it, that's up to them? To me, that's the most important thing ever. And I just want to say to everybody, it's like, please don't discount the capacity of what your greatest gifts are, and be fearless about being able to create and manifest a life based on them, because there's somebody out there that needs to hear what you have to say, and you're the one that can change someone's life.
Beautiful words. Absolutely. Beautiful words. Thank you for that. So, Jeff, as we're wrapping up our conversation here, a couple of questions before we end the conversation. And we have all of your social handles, the website address. We'll go ahead and put that, of course, in the show notes. I know that our audience is going to want to connect with you. They're going to want to learn more about you. They're going to want to consume your content. So I would love it if you would give our audience a challenge. What would you challenge all of us to do, including me? You just spoke to one, but I'd like you to give us another challenge as well.
That is a really good question. So let me give some thought to that. Yeah, here's the challenge. Take what you think you need. You go put it in a safe deposit box. And what I mean by that, we all rely on something to make up for us, which we should be doing for ourselves. Like an athlete once, I felt that he was putting way too much power into his vitamins. I said, don't stop taking your vitamins. He said, well, why should I do that? I need them. I said, no, you don't. Because you're expecting your vitamins to do for you what you should be doing for yourself. Don't take it for a month. As a matter of fact, I want you to go to Baskin Robbins and get a scoop of 3 ice cream scoops. Call me back and tell me, how it tastes. No, I can't do that. It's against my diet. Well, what do you mean? Yeah, it's like, well, that's going to ruin a perfect diet. It means I can't win. I said, look, dude, it's not about the ice cream making you win. It's about you showing up and doing what has to get done when it's got to get done. Why don't you just put that away? And I sort of sometimes feel like, maybe we guys just, put your Rolex away, just, dress down a little bit, drive a modest car, and, maybe, for, others, don't put your makeup on for a week and see if you can show up and be you without all the stuff that you think that you need to be you. Why don't we just sort of test ourselves against that reality and see what it's like? And I can tell you that there's a liberation that comes with that, where you finally realize that the props that you think that you need, you kind of don't. And it frees you up a lot. Then you can go back to that stuff and it can be okay. I'm all for that. I'm all for beauty. I'm all for prosperity. I love fine quality stuff. I love anything that's beautifully engineered or designed. I love all that stuff, but not when it starts to take up and speak for us when we should be speaking for ourselves based upon our own actions. That's the challenge.
Beautiful. That is a good one. Thank you for that. And Jeff, here's my final question to you. What is the most difficult decision that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person you are today?
That's, well, I would answer this by saying in the dimension that we live in, there's only so much time, energy, and space. And it's not going to be possible to do everything. That's just the reality. And so I would say that it's very interesting you would ask me this, because there is one thing that I would say that I could have done better at, but I didn't know it at the time. The people that I have been exposed to and the people that I have met along my journey have been unbelievable in their accomplishments, etc. And some of those relationships could have been cultivated better, but I never had guidance in showing me how to cultivate and how to grow and how to maintain certain relationships. And so certain relationships that could have been fostered and could have grown kind of were absorbed into the background. And then there was a bit of a expiration date on some of those, and to go back and rekindle those, the time has come and gone on that. So I kind of regret that side of it, if that, answers that part of the question. But that also, like, had I had a father that could have shown me that, it would have been obviously something that worked to my advantage that I didn't have. But at the end of the day, here I am, like right now, and I can share what I know with people to help them avoid some of the downside risks that we sometimes are unaware of, that do compromise what we do. And that's why I'm still in the game.
And I would say that is the gift. One of the gifts that you give to others is taking those lessons, taking those difficult decisions, those things that we learn that there may be some regret attached to it, but then we can pass on that wisdom and help someone else who may not have had a father or a mother or the experience that was needed to learn those lessons. So that's a gift. Thank you for sharing. So, Jeff, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has been a remarkable conversation. Thank you for sharing of your wisdom and your experience and sharing part of your story and your humanity. I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Well, back at you, Jay. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing, amazing guests just like Jeff. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com. Click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep reaching for your full potential, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.